When God breaks a man, he does not do so with malice, but with purpose. It is often in the most painful and trying moments of life that one begins to see a deeper truth about the world, about themselves, and about the divine forces that shape their journey. The breaking of a man is not an event of destruction, but one of reconstruction. It is the process by which God removes the elements of the self that hinder growth and builds a stronger, more resilient version of that individual. Life, in all its unpredictability, tends to throw at us challenges that often seem too great to bear. The loss of a loved one, the failure of a dream, a betrayal of trust, the collapse of hope. These experiences feel like breaking points. It is during such moments that a person may feel abandoned, lost, and fragile, as though their entire identity is crumbling beneath them. But in these very moments, God works in profound ways, stripping away the superficial, the transient, and the unnecessary, so that something deeper and more enduring can emerge. This process of breaking is not one of instantaneous devastation. It often unfolds slowly, almost imperceptibly. It can take the form of a series of events that seem unrelated at first, but gradually reveal themselves to be part of a larger plan. God uses the moments of our deepest pain to shape us, to draw us closer to the divine truth that exists beyond our understanding. The brokenness that we experience is not an end, but a beginning. Consider the metaphor of the potter and the clay. The clay, before it is shaped, is soft and malleable, easily molded into whatever form the potter desires. But in order for the clay to become something useful, it must first be broken, softened, and reformed. The potter does not discard the clay when it is broken, but instead shapes it into something new and more beautiful than before. Similarly, God does not abandon us in our brokenness. Instead, he uses those moments to shape us into the individuals he intends for us to become. The breaking is a process, not a punishment. One of the most painful aspects of being broken is the feeling of isolation. It can feel as though the world has turned its back on us, as though no one can understand the depth of our suffering. But it is precisely in these moments of brokenness that God is often closest to us, even if we cannot see or feel his presence. The brokenness strips away the layers of ego, pride, and self-sufficiency that prevent us from truly experiencing God's love and grace. When we are at our lowest, we are most likely to reach out to him, to seek his help, and to open ourselves to his healing touch. The breaking of a man is also a necessary step in the process of spiritual growth. Without struggle, without hardship, there can be no transformation. A person who has never known hardship may be kind, but their character may lack the depth that only comes through overcoming adversity. Those who have been broken are often the ones who understand the true value of compassion, patience, and humility. It is in the furnace of suffering that the impurities of the soul are burned away, and the pure gold of character emerges. The purpose of breaking is not to destroy, but to purify. It is easy to fall into the trap of thinking that life is unfair, that the suffering we experience is meaningless. But if we look closely, we can see that our most painful moments often hold the seeds of our greatest growth. It is through our brokenness that we learn to trust in God's plan for us, even when we cannot see the end result. The breaking is a necessary prelude to a deeper relationship with the Creator, one that is built not on superficial understanding, but on the foundation of faith and trust. Through our suffering, we also learn the value of grace. When we are broken, we often find ourselves in a place where we cannot save ourselves. We are forced to rely on the grace of God, to recognize that we are not in control and that we are dependent on something greater than ourselves. This is a humbling experience, one that strips away our illusions of self-sufficiency and brings us to a place of surrender. It is in this surrender that we experience the true freedom of God's love. A broken man, when transformed, becomes a living testament to the power of God's redemption. His life becomes a story of overcoming, of rising from the ashes, of being restored to something greater than he was before. The person who has been broken and remade is often the one who is most able to offer hope and healing to others. They have walked through the fire and emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Their brokenness, once a source of shame, becomes a source of strength and a symbol of the grace that has carried them through. The process of breaking and rebuilding is not always quick or easy. It may take years, even decades, before the full effects of God's work in a person's life are fully realized. But the end result is always worth the struggle. The broken man, remade in God's image, becomes a reflection of his glory, a living testimony to the power of redemption. Through the process of breaking, God shapes us into the person he created us to be, a person who is stronger, more compassionate, and more attuned to the divine presence in every moment of life. At the heart of this process is the idea that God's love never abandons us, even in our darkest moments. The breaking is not a sign of his absence, but a sign of his presence, guiding us toward greater spiritual maturity. The breaking may hurt, but it is never without purpose. It is always part of the larger plan that God has for each of us, a plan that, though mysterious, is always good. When God breaks a man, he does so with love, with care, and with the intent of bringing that person closer to the fullness of who they are meant to be. In the end, the brokenness becomes the very thing that leads to wholeness, to healing, and to a deeper relationship with the divine. When God breaks a man, it is not with the intention of tearing him apart, but rather with the purpose of rebuilding him into something stronger, wiser, and more aligned with the divine plan. Life's trials can often feel like moments of utter devastation, and when a person is broken, they may struggle to see any higher purpose in their suffering. It's natural to question why we are subjected to such pain, why we are forced to endure losses, failures, and heartache. Yet, the breaking process in the hands of God is a necessary and profound act of transformation. It is a form of spiritual refinement, an essential step in the molding of a person who can withstand the pressures of life and walk with a deeper sense of purpose. The breaking process often begins with stripping away the layers of self-dependence, ego, pride, and comfort. We live in a world that encourages us to build identities based on external achievements, possessions, and recognition. But these things, while they may offer temporary satisfaction, are not the foundation upon which lasting peace and strength are built. When God breaks a man, he removes these superficial layers that hide our true identity. He shatters the illusion that we are self-sufficient and invulnerable, forcing us to confront our weaknesses and limitations. It is in these moments of brokenness that we are reminded of our humanity and our need for something greater than ourselves. Initially, this process can feel harsh and undeserved. We may cry out in pain, feeling abandoned and forgotten, as though our lives have been reduced to rubble. Yet the very nature of God's breaking is not destruction, but rather a precursor to restoration. It's like the process of pruning a tree. In order for it to grow strong and bear fruit, the dead or unnecessary branches must be cut away. Similarly, God removes the parts of our lives that distract us from our true purpose. The loss, the hardship, and the suffering serve to refine us, creating space for the deeper, more meaningful aspects of life to flourish. This process of breaking is not an instant one. It often happens gradually over a series of events that seem unrelated at first, but are, in fact, divinely orchestrated steps toward growth. God, in his infinite wisdom, knows exactly what each person needs in order to grow, and he tailors the breaking process to suit the unique circumstances of every life. What one person needs to experience in order to be broken may be vastly different from what another requires, but the end goal remains the same, a transformation that prepares the individual for a greater purpose and a deeper connection with God. As God breaks a person, he also rebuilds them. This is the beauty of divine intervention. The brokenness is not a permanent state, but a temporary one that makes way for a stronger, more resilient individual. God's rebuilding process is like the work of a master craftsman who takes raw, imperfect materials and shapes them into something beautiful and functional. Similarly, God takes the raw, unrefined elements of our lives, the flaws, the fears, the mistakes, and he uses them to form a person capable of achieving his divine purpose. This process of rebuilding is not only about strength, but also about depth. It's easy to look at a person who has been broken and assume that they are now simply stronger or more resilient. But the truth is, when God breaks a man, he also deepens their capacity for love, compassion, and empathy. The person who has been broken, who has walked through the furnace of suffering, emerges with a greater understanding of the struggles of others. They are more attuned to the pain of the world, more willing to offer a hand of comfort and understanding to those in need. Their brokenness has not made them hardened or callous, but has instead expanded their hearts to carry the weight of other people's burdens. In this way, the breaking process is transformative not just on an individual level, but also in relation to others. A person who has been broken by God becomes more equipped to serve others, to offer wisdom and guidance born out of personal experience. Their story becomes one of hope and healing, a testament to the power of divine grace and restoration. They are no longer just individuals, they are vessels of God's love, showing the world what it means to be rebuilt after brokenness. What's important to understand is that the breaking process is not punishment, it's divine intervention. God does not break us to destroy us, but to refine us, to bring us closer to the purpose He has designed for us. The process is not without pain, but it is always purposeful. It's in the moments when we feel most shattered that God is at work, laying the foundation for something much greater than we can see at the time. The key to understanding the purpose of breaking is realizing that it is not an end, but a new beginning. In conclusion, when God breaks a man, He is not seeking to destroy him, but to shape him into the person he was always meant to become. The breaking process removes the superficial aspects of our lives, our false sense of control, our pride, our reliance on external things, and allows us to be rebuilt into something stronger, more resilient, and more in tune with God's plan. The breaking is not a permanent state of loss, but a temporary transformation that leads to a deeper, more fulfilling life. Through God's grace, we are not just mended after being broken, we are made new, and in this newness, we are better able to fulfill the purpose that God has set before us. In times of brokenness, many individuals experience a profound sense of isolation. The weight of suffering, whether emotional, physical, or spiritual, often makes people feel as if they are walking through their struggles alone. In the moments when we feel the most broken, it can seem as though the world has turned its back on us, and even God may feel distant. The overwhelming pain can create a barrier between us and the rest of the world, leading to feelings of abandonment. Yet, these very moments, when we feel the most isolated, can be the ones when God is closest to us, working behind the scenes, shaping us in ways we may not immediately recognize. Isolation and brokenness is a paradox. On the surface, it feels like we are being cast out, left to navigate our struggles on our own. We may experience this in various ways: the loss of a loved one, the collapse of a dream, or the sudden upheaval of our lives. These experiences can often lead to feelings of despair and loneliness, and the emotional distance from others can feel insurmountable. We may struggle to articulate the depth of our pain, and even if we could, we might fear that no one would truly understand. In such times, it is easy to wonder if God is still present, or if He has abandoned us in our suffering. However, it is important to understand that isolation in times of brokenness is often a misunderstood experience. While it may feel like we are abandoned, the truth is that God is deeply present in those moments. It is in these dark valleys that God works most profoundly, even when His presence is not immediately felt. Scripture often speaks of God being close to the brokenhearted and saving those who are crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18, for example, says, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit." God is not distant in our pain. He is near, often more so than we realize. The isolation we experience during times of brokenness serves a greater purpose. It forces us to confront ourselves, our weaknesses, and our deepest needs. When we are stripped of external distractions and comforts, we are left with only our inner selves and the space to reflect on our relationship with God. This is when God often works most powerfully in us, calling us to a deeper intimacy. We are forced to rely on God more completely, recognizing that He is the only true source of strength and peace in the midst of our suffering. The emotional distance we feel from others can in fact draw us closer to God as we seek His presence in our lives with a greater sense of urgency and dependence. It's also in isolation that we often discover the depth of God's love for us. When things are going well, it's easy to forget how deeply God cares for us, as our lives may feel full and sufficient on their own. But when we are broken, we are reminded that our true worth and strength are not found in our circumstances or in the approval of others, but in our identity as beloved children of God. It is in times of pain and isolation that we can experience God's unconditional love in its purest form, as He meets us in our brokenness with tenderness, grace, and compassion. Though we may not always recognize it, God is intimately present in our brokenness, guiding us through the pain and transforming us in the process. Often, it is in the silence of our suffering that God speaks most clearly. The quiet, painful moments are those in which we may hear the still, small voice of God more distinctly. In these times, He does not always offer immediate relief or answers, but He provides comfort and assurance, reassuring us that He is with us even when we cannot see or feel His presence. This intimacy with God grows as we learn to lean into Him rather than resist the pain. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable in our suffering, we create space for God to enter into our pain and heal us. It is often in our weakness that His strength becomes most apparent, as we come to understand that we are not expected to have all the answers or carry the weight of life on our own. Instead, we are invited to rest in God's care, trusting that He is using our brokenness to shape us into the people He has called us to be. The brokenness we experience may not be something we can easily explain or understand, but it is precisely in these moments that God is often doing His most profound work in us. Like a potter shaping clay, God uses the pressure, the breaking, and the reforming to mold us into vessels that reflect His glory. Our isolation can become a place of deep communion with God, a place where we are most open to His healing and transforming touch. The intimacy that God offers us in our brokenness is not a fleeting comfort, but a lasting transformation. He invites us into a deeper relationship, one where we are no longer relying on our own strength or the approval of others, but on His love and grace. Ultimately, the isolation we feel during times of brokenness is not the end of the story. It is not a permanent state of abandonment, but a temporary journey that leads to greater intimacy with God. In the depths of our suffering, God is working to bring us closer to Him, to refine our character, and to help us grow in ways we never thought possible. Through this intimate process, we come to understand that brokenness is not something to fear, but something through which God can reveal Himself in powerful and life-changing ways. In the end, it is through our brokenness that we learn to depend on God in deeper ways and experience His presence more fully than we ever could in times of ease and comfort. Spiritual growth through adversity is one of life's most profound yet challenging realities. When faced with hardship and struggle, it often feels as if the very foundation of our lives is being shaken. It's easy to wish for a life free from pain where everything flows smoothly and effortlessly. However, the truth is that hardship is not only inevitable but necessary for spiritual and personal growth. Without challenges, a person's character cannot develop the depth and resilience that adversity brings. In many ways, it is through our struggles that we discover the true strength of our faith and the depths of our own character. At its core, adversity is a powerful force of transformation. When life is easy and everything is going according to plan, we may become complacent, content in the surface-level aspects of life. But it is when we are tested by difficulties that we are forced to confront the deeper parts of ourselves. Trials compel us to question our assumptions, to let go of self-reliance, and to acknowledge our limitation. This process of confrontation is often uncomfortable, but it is precisely through this discomfort that spiritual growth occurs. Challenges invite us to move beyond our comfort zones, forcing us to step into unknown territories of faith, trust, and perseverance. Without adversity, there is little room for true personal development or spiritual awakening. Adversity, while painful, serves as a crucible that refines our hearts and minds. Just as gold is purified through intense heat, so too are our souls purified through the trials we face. In difficult times, we often experience feelings of helplessness and vulnerability, and it is during these moments that God works most powerfully in us. Stripped of our pride, our sense of control, and our self-sufficiency, we are left with only our faith. It is in these times that we learn to lean more fully on God's grace, to trust in His timing, and to surrender our need for immediate answers or solutions. In adversity, we come to understand that we are not in control of everything and that the strength we need to persevere must come from a higher source. One of the greatest gifts that adversity offers is the development of empathy and compassion for others. When we face our own struggles, we become more attuned to the pain and suffering of others. Having walked through fire, we are more likely to reach out to others in their pain, offering a hand of support, understanding, and comfort. Suffering has a way of opening our eyes to the world beyond ourselves. It reminds us that we are not alone in our pain, and it deepens our capacity to love and serve others who are going through their own difficulties. Through our own struggles, we learn to see others with a heart full of compassion, understanding that they too are carrying burdens and fighting battles we may not see. Patience is another quality that adversity fosters. In moments of difficulty, it can feel as if there is no end in sight, no resolution to the problems we face. We may be tempted to give up or to grow bitter toward God or others for allowing such hardship in our lives. However, it is precisely in these moments that we are called to practice patience. The Bible speaks often of waiting on the Lord and trusting in His perfect timing. In times of struggle, we are reminded that God's plan for us is unfolding, even when we cannot see the end result. Adversity teaches us that we cannot always rush the process of growth, healing, or transformation. Some things take time, and in that time, God is shaping us, refining us, and preparing us for what lies ahead. Humility is another trait that is developed through hardship. Adversity brings us face to face with our own limitations and weaknesses. We are often forced to confront parts of ourselves that we would rather ignore or deny. These humbling moments, though painful, are essential for our spiritual and personal growth. We are reminded that we are not invincible and that we cannot face life's challenges on our own strength. Humility allows us to approach others with greater understanding and grace, recognizing that we all have our struggles and imperfections. It teaches us to rely not on our own abilities, but on the strength and wisdom that comes from God. Another significant aspect of spiritual growth through adversity is the development of perseverance and resilience. When we face difficulties, it's easy to become discouraged or to want to give up. But in those moments, we are presented with the opportunity to persevere. Each challenge we face, no matter how small or large, is a test of our endurance and our ability to keep moving forward, even when the path seems unclear or the road feels impossibly long. Perseverance builds spiritual muscle, fortifying our faith and increasing our trust in God. Through each trial, we learn to rely on God's promises, knowing that He is with us in the midst of the storm and that He will give us the strength to overcome. Ultimately, the spiritual and personal growth that comes through adversity leads to a deeper, more authentic relationship with God. Through our struggles, we are forced to confront the very core of our faith. We are challenged to move beyond superficial understandings of God and begin to experience Him in new and more profound ways. We begin to trust in God not just because of His blessings, but because of His character. We learn that He is faithful even in the darkest of times. and that His love for us is unwavering regardless of our circumstances. In conclusion, adversity is an essential ingredient for spiritual and personal growth. Without hardship and struggle, our character would remain shallow and our faith would lack depth. Through adversity, we develop compassion, patience, humility, resilience, and perseverance. Qualities that shape us into the people God created us to be. These challenges force us to confront our weaknesses and limitations, and in doing so, they lead us to a deeper reliance on God's grace and a more intimate relationship with Him. It is in the crucible of hardship that we are refined, purified, and transformed, becoming more like Christ and more attuned to the world around us. And though the process may be painful, it is always purposeful, preparing us for the future God has in store for us. The process of purification and refinement through suffering is one of the most profound aspects of spiritual growth. Life's hardships, which often feel like a form of breaking, serve as tools in the hands of God to purify the soul. Much like a precious metal is refined through intense heat to remove impurities, suffering serves to refine the human spirit, stripping away the elements of our character that hinder our growth. These impurities, pride, selfishness, fear, and doubt, are often the very things that cloud our understanding and hinder our connection to God. Through trials, God carefully burns away these impurities, leaving behind a soul more attuned to His will, more compassionate toward others, and more resilient in the face of life's inevitable challenges. The analogy of purification is found throughout the Bible, where the process of refining gold is used to describe how God shapes His people. In the book of Malachi, for example, God says, "He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. He will purify the Levites and refine them like gold and silver." This image of God as a refiner highlights the care and precision with which He works in our lives, using suffering not to destroy us, but to mold us into something more valuable and enduring. Just as gold must be heated to the point where the impurities rise to the surface and are skimmed off, so too must we endure the heat of trials to allow our impurities to be revealed and removed. Suffering is often the furnace in which we are refined, but it is not a purposeless or random process. Each trial we face is carefully calibrated by God to bring us closer to our true selves and to the image of His Son. Though the pain may feel overwhelming, it is important to remember that God's refining process is not designed to break us down permanently, but to build us up, to bring out the very best in us. It is during times of hardship that we are most often confronted with our weaknesses, our flaws, and our brokenness. Whether it's a moment of grief, disappointment, rejection, or personal failure, the pain often forces us to take an honest look at ourselves, at the places within us that need healing and growth. It is through this confrontation with our own vulnerabilities that God begins His work of purification. The pride that once made us blind to the needs of others, the selfish desires that clouded our vision of God's greater plan, the doubts that caused us to question His goodness, these are the very things that God burns away in the fire of our suffering. This process of purification is not always comfortable. It often feels like we are being stretched beyond our capacity, forced to surrender the things we once clung to in order to become more like Christ. But it is through this surrender that we are refined and made pure. Well, the purification process is also a way in which God teaches us to rely less on our own strength and more on His. When we are strong in our own abilities, when life is easy and we feel secure, it can be easy to forget our dependence on God. We might become self-reliant, thinking that we have all the answers and that we can handle whatever comes our way. However, suffering has a way of breaking down our illusions of control. When we are faced with circumstances beyond our ability to change or understand, we are forced to rely more fully on God's strength, wisdom, and grace. In this way, suffering becomes a tool of purification as it teaches us to surrender our will to God and trust in His divine plan, even when we don't see the whole picture. Purification through suffering also helps to cultivate deeper qualities in our character. As the impurities of our soul are burned away, qualities like compassion, humility, and patience are formed. It is easy to be kind and generous when life is comfortable and smooth, but it is only through adversity that we learn the true depth of compassion. When we experience pain, we become more attuned to the suffering of others. Our hearts are softened, and we are more willing to extend grace and empathy to those who are walking their own difficult journeys. In the process of purification, we begin to see the world through the eyes of God, eyes full of love, understanding, and mercy. Similarly, the purification process cultivates humility. When we face challenges, we are often reminded of our own limitations. Suffering exposes our weaknesses and forces us to acknowledge that we cannot navigate life on our own. In this humility, we are better able to relate to others and recognize that we are all imperfect, broken beings in need of God's grace. Humility also enables us to let go of our need for control and to trust that God is working out a greater plan for our lives, even when we cannot see it. Patience is another quality that is developed through the process of purification. When we go through difficult times, it can be easy to want immediate relief or answers. We might find ourselves questioning why the pain persists or why things are not changing. However, it is in these moments that God teaches us to wait on Him, to trust that He is doing a work in us, even if it isn't immediately visible. As we wait, our faith is deepened, and we learn to endure with hope, knowing that God is faithful to complete the work He has begun in us. Through the refining process, we are also made more resilient. Just as gold becomes stronger and more valuable after being purified, so too do we become stronger through the trials we face. We learn to persevere, to stand firm in our faith, and to continue moving forward even when the road is difficult. This resilience is not based on our own strength, but on the power of God working in us. It is the strength that comes from knowing that God is with us in the fire and that He will never leave us or forsake us. Ultimately, the goal of purification is to bring us closer to the likeness of Christ. Jesus Himself was perfected through suffering, and in our own suffering, we are invited to share in His transformation. As God purifies us, He removes the impurities that hinder us from reflecting His glory, leaving behind the pure gold of a character that is more aligned with His will. Though the process of purification can be painful, it is always purposeful. It refines us, strengthens us, and prepares us to fulfill the calling God has placed on our lives. Through the fire of suffering, we are transformed into vessels that can carry His love, grace, and truth into a broken world. And in the end, the pain of the process is overshadowed by the beauty of the person we become. A person who reflects the purity, strength, and character of Christ. When a person is broken, whether by personal tragedy, emotional upheaval, or the weight of life's struggles, they are often thrust into a place of vulnerability and helplessness. It's in these moments, when everything feels uncertain and out of control, that the true essence of grace and dependence on God becomes clear. For many, the experience of brokenness forces them to confront their own limitations, their inability to control or fix the circumstances they find themselves in. This brokenness, while painful, is not a punishment, but an invitation to surrender, to recognize that we are not self-sufficient and that we desperately need God's grace. It is a moment of awakening, a realization that there is something greater than ourselves at work in our lives, something that can heal, restore, and guide us toward spiritual freedom. In times of suffering, our usual defenses and coping mechanisms often fail. We may have spent our lives relying on our own strength, intellect, or resources to navigate the world. When life is going well, it's easy to believe that we are in control, that our hard work and perseverance will carry us through any challenge. However, when we are broken, the illusion of self-sufficiency fades away. We find ourselves face to face with our limitations, and it is precisely in this moment of humility that God's grace shines most brightly. Grace, by its very nature, is not something we can earn or deserve. It is a gift freely given, an unmerited favor from God that allows us to face our trials, our flaws, and our weaknesses with hope. Grace teaches us to surrender our need for control and to trust that God's plan is greater than our own. It is a humbling experience to realize that we cannot carry the weight of our burdens alone. When we are broken, we come to understand that the strength we once thought we had is insufficient, and we are forced to lean into God's grace. This surrender is not a sign of weakness, but a profound strength, because it acknowledges that we are not the ones in control, and we are placing our trust in the hands of a loving and all-powerful God who knows the end from the beginning. It is in the act of surrender that we begin to experience true spiritual freedom, a freedom that comes not from the absence of struggles, but from the presence of God in the midst of our pain. Dependence on God during brokenness is an invitation to deepen our relationship with Him. When life is smooth, we can sometimes drift away from God, relying on our own abilities or understanding of the world. But when we face trials, our dependence on God brings us back to the heart of our faith. It is a reminder that we were never meant to walk this journey alone. We were created to live in relationship with God, to rely on His wisdom, strength, and grace. The trials we face are often what bring us back to this truth, reminding us that our lives are ultimately in His hands. This deeper connection with God is not just about seeking comfort in times of hardship, although God's comfort is certainly a part of His grace. It is also about learning to trust God in ways we never have before. When everything around us falls apart, we are invited to trust in His sovereignty, to believe that He has a purpose for our pain, and that He will use it to shape us for something greater. It is in this trust that our faith grows, and we begin to see that God is not just a source of comfort, but a source of transformation. His grace works in the brokenness to shape us into the people He created us to be. We begin to understand that God's plan for us is not just about our own happiness or success, but about our spiritual growth and our ability to serve others. The more we experience God's grace in our brokenness, the more we learn that grace is not just a one-time experience, but an ongoing journey. It is not simply about receiving forgiveness for past mistakes, but about living in a posture of dependence on God every day. Grace is what sustains us in the midst of trials, gives us strength when we are weak, and empowers us to move forward when we feel like giving up. It is what enables us to forgive when we have been wrong, to love when we feel unloved, and to persevere when the road ahead seems impossible. The more we lean into God's grace, the more we come to understand that it is the very thing that sustains us through every season of life. In times of brokenness, our dependence on God leads to a profound freedom. It is not the kind of freedom that comes from avoiding pain or escaping hardship, but the freedom that comes from knowing that we are not defined by our circumstances. We are free from the need to control every aspect of our lives, free from the pressure of self-reliance, and free to surrender our burdens to God, trusting that He will carry them for us. This freedom allows us to live with a sense of peace and contentment, knowing that even in the midst of our struggles, God is at work in us. We are free to let go of our need for perfection, free to embrace our brokenness as a part of our journey, and free to trust that God is shaping us through every moment. True spiritual freedom is found in the act of surrender, in the daily choice to rely on God's grace rather than on our own strength. It is the recognition that we do not have to carry our burdens alone, that God's grace is sufficient for every trial we face. In this surrender, we are transformed, becoming more like Christ, who modeled perfect dependence on the Father. As we learn to depend on God more fully, we are drawn into a deeper relationship with Him, one that transcends our circumstances and brings us peace, joy, and hope. Our brokenness becomes a doorway to a new level of spiritual intimacy with God, and through this intimacy, we discover the true freedom that comes from living in His grace. In conclusion, the experience of brokenness forces us to rely on God's grace, leading us to a deeper understanding of our dependence on Him. This surrender allows us to experience true spiritual freedom as we recognize that we are not in control and we place our trust in God's loving and perfect plan for our lives. Through this dependence, we are transformed, drawing closer to God and discovering a deeper connection with Him that shapes our hearts, minds, and actions. In the end, it is through grace that we are healed, refined, and made whole, ready to face whatever challenges come our way with confidence in God's sustaining power. When a person undergoes deep brokenness, it often feels as if their life has been shattered beyond repair. The pain, the loss, the emotional turmoil, each piece seems irreparably damaged, as though no amount of healing could restore what has been lost. Yet, in the midst of this brokenness, God works in profound ways. His redemptive power doesn't just heal the wounds, it transforms them into something beautiful and purposeful. Through the process of healing, the broken person is not only restored, but also renewed, becoming a living testimony to God's power to redeem and transform even the most broken lives. Redemption is one of the core themes of the Christian faith. It speaks to the ability of God to take something that is ruined and make it whole again, to take something lost and bring it back to life. In the same way that Jesus redeemed humanity through his death and resurrection, so too does God redeem the brokenness we experience in our lives. No matter how shattered or hopeless our circumstances may seem, God's grace and power can bring transformation. When we are healed from our brokenness, we are not just restored to where we were before, but are made new with a purpose that is greater than the sum of our past pain. For many, the process of redemption involves a deep and painful journey of healing. It's easy to believe that healing should be quick or instant, especially when we are in the midst of pain. However, God's redemption often unfolds over time as we allow Him to work in our hearts and lives. Through this process, we experience the fullness of His love, grace, and faithfulness. Each step of healing is a testimony to the redemptive work of God, showing that even the most broken heart can be mended and even the most difficult circumstances can be used for a greater purpose. As the broken person heals, they become a living example of God's power to redeem. Their story becomes a testimony to others that there is hope, that there is light even in the darkest of times. The transformation they undergo is not just physical or emotional, but spiritual. When God redeems a life, it is a holistic restoration, healing not just the surface wounds, but the deep places of the soul. It's a transformation that goes beyond simply fixing what is broken. It's about creating something new. Through God's redemptive power, the person who once felt lost, abandoned, or defeated finds new purpose, a renewed sense of identity, and a deep fulfillment in their relationship with God. This transformation is often so profound that it becomes a beacon of hope for others. The person who once struggled with addiction, depression, or grief can now speak with authority and compassion to others who find themselves in similar situations. Their testimony becomes a living example of what is possible when someone surrenders their brokenness to God and allows Him to do the work of redemption. They are living proof that no matter how far we fall, God's grace is able to lift us higher than we ever thought possible. For those who have witnessed this kind of transformation, the power of God becomes undeniable. When we see someone overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles, whether it's personal loss, illness, or emotional trauma, we are reminded of God's faithfulness and power. It is through these living testimonies that others find the courage to believe that their own lives can be redeemed. The healing of one person becomes a source of strength and hope for an entire community. In this way, brokenness is not just a personal journey, but a communal one. Through the redeemed lives of individuals, others are drawn into the redemptive story of God. Through their brokenness, the person who has been healed often finds a new sense of purpose. Before the pain and adversity, they may have been focused on their own desires, plans, and goals, but in the aftermath of healing, they begin to see life through a different lens. Their experiences of suffering and redemption give them a deeper understanding of the world around them. They become more empathetic, more compassionate, and more driven to help others who are facing similar struggles. Their brokenness, once a source of pain, now becomes a source of strength. They have been equipped to help others walk the difficult path of healing, not with judgment, but with grace and understanding. The person who has been redeemed no longer defines themselves by their past failures or pains. Instead, they define themselves by the work of God in their life. They see their past as part of God's larger plan for them, a testimony of His grace, and a tool for their own growth and the growth of others. In this way, their brokenness becomes a stepping stone to something greater. It's a powerful reminder that God does not waste our pain. He uses it to shape us into who we are meant to be. The broken pieces of our lives, when given to God, become a beautiful mosaic reflecting His glory and grace. The journey from brokenness to redemption and transformation is not without its challenges. There may still be moments of doubt, fear, and even relapse into old habits or ways of thinking, but the process is ongoing, and with each step, the person becomes more grounded in their faith and trust in God's redemptive power. So it's important to recognize that redemption is not about being perfect. Rather, it's about being faithful to God's work in our lives, allowing Him to shape us even in our imperfections. In the end, a broken person who has been healed and transformed becomes a testimony to the world of God's ability to redeem and restore. Their life, marked by overcoming adversity, becomes a beacon of hope for those who feel lost or hopeless. Through their own brokenness, they find greater purpose and fulfillment in God's plan. The pain they once carried has been used to shape them into a person who is more compassionate, more loving, and more committed to serving others. Their transformation becomes a living proof that God is always at work, redeeming even the darkest moments of our lives and using them for His glory. Through brokenness, healing, and redemption, the person finds not just a restored life, but a transformed one, a life filled with purpose, hope, and the profound knowledge that God is always at work, making all things new. Their story becomes part of the larger story of God's redemptive work in the world. And in sharing that story, they bring others into the transformative power of God's love.